Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Almassian. Today, we have to discuss a very important topic. We are receiving news from Ukraine since yesterday that there was a blast that hit the Nova Kakhovka dam. I hope I'm not butchering the name of this dam. And I have a personal experience with dam explosions, which happened also in Syria, and we will come to that later. But I will show you, and I will show you bombshell revelations about this case that might indicate that the US or the UK, they planned with Ukraine to blast this Nova Kakhovka dam. This is not, of course, a final result and there is no investigation, and I don't think there will be any sort of investigation, but there was a huge explosion, and we have to see who benefits from this explosion, putting aside our biases. Could be Russia, it could be Ukraine, it could be the United States, it could be a third country, we don't know. But in this video, I will discuss with you this case, and let's discuss together and see who was behind this explosion. So a huge dam in the Russian-controlled area in Kherson has been destroyed, which unleashed a flood of water that forced thousands of people on both sides, both the Ukrainian side and the Russian-controlled side, to evacuate. Now, Ukraine and NATO are accusing Russia of blasting the dam. On the other hand, Russia is blaming Ukraine. Now, first things first, the Nova Kakhovka dam blast, I consider it an act of environmental terrorism, as it puts the largest nuclear reactor in Europe in jeopardy. And now it's in the hands of Russia, but this blast will definitely affect the well-being of this nuclear reactor, right? And we know what could happen if this reactor is damaged. And after this, also, this dam explosion imposes far-reaching consequences on thousands of people in the Kherson region, as I mentioned, on both sides. I'm not excluding anything. But who did it? This is the major question. We have to know who did it. And I'm very confident that just like the Nord Stream pipelines, none of the parties, neither Russia nor NATO countries, will show concrete evidence who did it. But then there will be lots of investigations reports, intelligence reports, unnamed security officials who will reveal, and probably we will see one of the investigative journalists, such as Seymour Hersh, who may come in the near future, to reveal to us and to the world who did this environmental terrorism. Now, according to the mainstream media, Russia is definitely behind blowing up the dam, which supplies water, as I mentioned, to the Russian-controlled Crimea. And as you may know, Crimea is considered the most important piece of geography in this proxy war between NATO and Russia, because in Crimea, the Russian side has one of its most important fleet, and they are ready to go into World War III and nuclear war if it means, or if the Ukrainian side tries to capture Crimea. And remember, after 2014 coup, the first thing Russia did is secured Crimea, and they have taken control of it, and there was a referendum, and the people chose to join the Russian Federation, because for Russia, on a geopolitical level, Crimea is the most important geography in Ukraine, and without Crimea, the Russian side will not have a presence on the Black Sea. Its fleet will disappear, and also through the Black Sea, the Russian side can access to the Mediterranean. So geopolitically speaking, this is the most important geography in Ukraine. On the other side, of course, Russia is now blaming the NATO side or the Ukrainian side, etc. But destroying the dam definitely, in my opinion, hurts both sides. But Russia will suffer the most if it can't supply drinking water and also water for agricultural purposes to Crimea, which personally, I believe, is the goal of NATO. If NATO is behind the explosion of the dam, I think this is the goal. And the attitude of NATO here is, if we give in to the fact that Ukraine will never be able to capture Crimea again, making life difficult for Russia and the people living in Crimea sounds like a brilliant idea. And I have a proof for that. And this article is only today in the Reuters, by the way. this is speaking about the water geopolitics. The title says, canal irrigating Crimea getting drastically less water after Ukraine dam blast, says Kremlin. So a gaping hole punched in Ukraine's Nova Kakhovka dam that unleashed a wall of floodwater means that the canal, which has traditionally met most of Crimea's water needs, is receiving drastically less water, the Kremlin warned on Tuesday. The reservoir feeds the Soviet-era North Crimean Canal, a channel which has traditionally supplied 85% of Crimea's water. Most of the water is used for agriculture, some for industry, and around 1/5 for drinking water and other public needs. So the water geopolitics, the canal was blocked by Ukraine after Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea, something which led to acute water shortages on the peninsula that ended only after Russian forces seized the canal when they invaded on February 24th last year. Before the war, Russian President Vladimir Putin held frequent meetings on Crimea's water problems, trying to devise plans from drilling wells to building desalination plants that would allow the peninsula to become fully autonomous when it came to water. So as you can see, through this dam supplies water to this canal, and this canal supplies water to Crimea for agriculture, for industry, and for drinking. So if we calculate the pros and cons, whoever committed this act, if it's Russia, that means they are shooting their own feet. But if it's Ukraine, the attitude of Ukraine and NATO is, okay, we are not going to be able to capture Crimea again, but we will make your life hell in Crimea, which it's more plausible in my opinion, and this is what I believe in this case. And there is another very important thing, by the way, which I found out, and thanks to also Twitter investigators or Twitter activists. This is an article published on the Washington Post in December 2022. So after 8 months to the Russian invasion or the offensive on Ukraine, the Ukrainian forces were training under the US supervision. And here, the Major General Andriy Kovalchuk, so his name is Andriy Kovalchuk, he was tasked with leading the Kherson counteroffensive. He said in December 2022 that he considered flooding the river. So he considered flooding the same river that we are addressing right now. In fact, the Ukrainian army even conducted a test strike with an American HIMARS launcher on one of the floodgates at the Nova Kakhovka Dam. The test was a success, Kovalchuk said. So, I mean, you can make up your mind, guys. I mean, the Ukrainian army was training on hitting the dam only 6 months ago under the American supervision. And the Major General Andriy Kovalchuk said that during the training was successful, and they succeeded in hitting the dam using American HIMARS missiles or launcher. So if this is true, if they repeated what they did during the training in a true situation, in a true life situation, then the Russian side should show an evidence. And I think it's not very difficult to show an evidence if they have some satellite imagery or other drone imagery. I think at these times it's not so difficult. And if this is the case, the Russian side should come and show the evidence to the public, and or they can also most probably also leak such an information or imagery to the media, to some of the investigative journalists and independent media, etc., which something happens a lot. But bear in mind, guys, I'm going to show you also another article. It's very important for us to understand. Bear in mind that the US has a track record in committing such crimes, which is hitting water dams. And it happened in 2017 in Syria. So in March 2017, guys, near the height of the war against ISIS in Syria, a sudden riot of explosions rocked the country's largest dam, a towering 18-story structure on the Euphrates River that held back a 25-mile-long reservoir about a valley where hundreds of thousands of people lived. The Tabqa Dam was a strategic linchpin, and ISIS controlled it. The explosions on March 26, 2017 knocked dam workers to the ground, and everything went dark. The Islamic State, or ISIS, the Syrian government, and Russia blamed the United States. I don't think ISIS blamed the United States, but here they're trying to say as if like Syria and Russia and ISIS are on the same side, which they are not. And Syria and Russia, yes, they blamed the United States, but the dam was on the U.S. military's, quote, no strike list of protected civilian sites, and the commander of the U.S. offensive at the time, then Lieutenant General Stephen Townsend, said allegations of U.S. involvement were based on, quote, crazy reporting. He says, quote, the Tabqa Dam is not a coalition target, he declared emphatically 2 days after the blast. However, guys, this is from the New York Times, which has close ties to the regime in Washington. They say, in fact, members of a top secret U.S. Special Operations Unit called Task Force 9 had struck the dam using some of the largest conventional bombs in U.S. arsenal. So the Americans did it. They did it, and they put thousands, tens of thousands of people at risk. And see here what's it. And they had done it despite military report warning not to bomb the dam because the damage could cause a flood that might kill tens of thousands of civilians. So the United States has a track record in committing such terrorist attacks on other countries and trying to hide it. And then evidence surfaces, but nobody discusses these cases because the media isn't interested about it, the public opinion isn't interested about it, because this stuff are all under control, right? Who controls the media, guys? And who controls the narrative? And when you control the narrative and the stories, you also control the repercussions of these stories. So where is the ICC from this, right? Where is any other court, or how can we even sue the United States for destroying a very important dam in Syria, which supplies water to millions of people? And they were on the list of civilian targets that they shouldn't target. But they have done this continuously in Iraq. Bridges, roads in Syria, bridges, roads, dams in Afghanistan, in Libya. These are all examples for us to see that the United States done this before. So I will never rule out the possibility that they have done this again in Ukraine. And if they have done it, of course, in collaboration and cooperation with the Ukrainians and also the Brits in this regard. But if you watch the mainstream media, as one of our friends on Twitter said, Nixon, that if you follow the news, they will tell you that Russia blasted its own pipeline, the Nord Stream pipelines. Russia blew up the Crimean Bridge, which belongs to Russia, which connects the Russian mainland to the peninsula. Russia attacked its own nuclear power plant. You remember at the beginning of the war, which Russia occupies it, and they're bombing their own nuclear plant. And Russia attacked the Kremlin by drones, right? You remember just a few weeks ago. And finally, Russia blew up the dam that, as we discussed in this video, it supplies water to the Crimea, which is very, very essential for the Russian, I would say, stable control or imposing some sort of stability in Crimea. And today, Tucker Carlson, or yesterday, posted his first video on Twitter. And he spoke about this case, and I will show some of the minutes of it. And I think it's important for us also to see what Tucker Carlson said. This is his first episode. Let's check it together.
Hey, it's Tucker Carlson. This morning, it looks like somebody blew up the Kakhovka Dam in southern Ukraine. The rushing wall of water wiped out entire villages, destroyed a critical hydropower plant, and as of tonight, puts the largest nuclear reactor in Europe in danger of melting down. So if this was intentional, it was not a military tactic, it was an act of terrorism. The question is, who did it?
Yep.
Well, let's see. The Kakhovka Dam was effectively Russian. It was built by the Russian government. It currently sits in Russian-controlled territory. The dam's reservoir supplies water to Crimea, which has been, for the last 240 years, home of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Blowing up the dam may be bad for Ukraine, but it hurts Russia more. And for precisely that reason, the Ukrainian government has considered destroying it. In December, the Washington Post quoted a Ukrainian general saying his men had fired American-made rockets at the dam's floodgate as a test strike. So really, once the facts start coming in, it becomes much less of a mystery what might have happened to the dam. Any fair person would conclude that the Ukrainians probably blew it up, just as you would assume they blew up Nord Stream, the Russian natural gas pipeline, last fall. And in fact, the Ukrainians did do that, as we now know.
I disagree.
It's not
Americans
like Vladimir
did.
Putin is anxious to wage war on himself. Oh, but that's where you're wrong, Mr. and Mrs. Cable News consumer. Vladimir Putin is exactly that sort of man, the sort of man who'd shoot himself to death in order to annoy you. We know this from the American media, which wasted no time this morning in accusing the Russians of sabotaging their own infrastructure. Bill Kristol, the man who once told us that Saddam Hussein was responsible for 9/11, immediately denounced Putin as a war criminal and even more savagely compared him to Donald Trump. The rest of the pundit class made similar, clearly coordinated noises. Putin did it! Putin did it! And their reasoning was simple. Putin is evil, and evil people do evil things purely for the dark joy of being evil. In this specific case, Putin attacked himself, which is the most evil thing you can do, and therefore perfectly in character for a man that evil. That was their explanation. No one who's paid to cover these things seemed to entertain even the possibility it could have been the Ukrainians who did it. No chance of that. Ukraine, as you may have heard, is led by a man called Zelensky. And we can say for a dead certain fact that he was not involved. He couldn't have been. Zelensky is too decent for terrorism. Now, you see him on television, and it's true you might form a different impression. Sweaty and rat-like, a comedian turned oligarch, a persecutor of Christians, a friend of BlackRock. But don't believe your own eyes. Actually, Mr. Zelensky is a very good man. The best, really. As George W. Bush once noted, he is our generation's Winston Churchill. Of all the people in the world, our shifty, dead-eyed Ukrainian friend in the tracksuit is uniquely incapable of blowing up a dam. He's literally a living saint, a man in whom there is no sin. That's why Lindsey Graham is so attracted to him. They're just two good people, hanging out together and being good. And like all good people, when they meet in person, they spend a lot of time talking about killing people and laughing like friends do. Here's the pair last week.
Free or die.
Free or die.
Now you are free,
Yes.
and we will be.
And the Russians are dying.
It's the best money we've ever spent.
Thank you so much.
Wow.
The Russians are dying. It's the
Thank you
best
so
money
much.
we've ever spent, Graham says. A smile spreads across his thin, quivering lips as he forms the words. He looks like a starving man contemplating a breakfast buffet. The aroma of death has aroused Lindsey Graham. Thanks so much, replies Zelensky. He feels the same way. See, there's nothing dark here. Just two middle-aged guys celebrating the killing of a population. They don't seem like the kind of people who'd enjoy flooding villages or starting a famine. And in any case, who cares if they are? It's really not your business. Your job is to support Ukraine. Watch Nikki Haley, a Republican candidate for president, explain this principle on CNN.
A win for Ukraine is a win for all of us. And for them to sit there and say that this is a territorial dispute, that's just not the case. To say that we should stay neutral, it is in the best interest of America. It's in the best interest of our national security for Ukraine to win. We have to see this through. We have to finish it.
See? It's very easy to understand. It is vitally important for you to support Ukraine because it's necessary for Ukraine to be supported by you. Your support is mandatory until it's finished, whatever it is, and whatever that means. So shut up and support Ukraine, or else you're in trouble.
Do you realize, guys, all these American officials or Western officials who say Ukraine must win, they don't even define what victory is. And they don't even tell the audience what the repercussions for this so-called victory is. And whether or not Russia will really withdraw from the territories they occupied, and what about Crimea, which was part of Russia for a very long time, and then it was gifted in the 50s, if I'm not mistaken, to Ukraine by the Soviet leader. So it's a situation that is truly every time is going out of hands, and people are discussing whether or not this conflict will end up in a nuclear war, and people have all the right to ask these questions. But what can we do except for raising awareness and telling the people that there are two sides of the story, so that people at least ask their governments to push for diplomacy instead of sending weapons? And in this regard, probably I will show you that video tomorrow. The German chancellor went to a public speech, and he was confronted with lots of opposition to him, who were calling him a war criminal, and he started yelling at them like, the war criminal is Putin, he's like sending all these tanks to Ukraine, we have to save Ukraine. And people were telling him, save Ukraine by diplomacy talks. Why have we as human beings created diplomacy? Because there is always a possibility to solve such crisis. But I don't think the decision is in the hands of Germany. So the Americans have chosen to go further, and the Brits are going with them, and this is not good for humanity. So what do you think, guys, who blasted the Nova Kakhovka dam? Please be honest. Write your opinions in the comments below. Let's discuss this case, which is very, very important. Do you agree with me? You disagree with me? All the comments are welcomed. I don't delete any comments, guys. Some of the comments are held for review by YouTube because you use certain words or terminologies. I cannot really go through these comments to manually accept them. So I don't do anything. I just leave all the comments. Unless there are some people cursing, smearing, swearing, and all this was like, I really detest on this channel. Let's keep things civilized, guys. And 99% of them are civilized. And thank you so much, guys, for supporting Syriana Analysis. I'm receiving new patrons recently. We have now 102 patrons for Syriana Analysis, and I don't really know that if I should thank you guys personally, like say your names on YouTube. Probably some of you don't want their names to be mentioned. So if you're watching this, thank you so much. It really means a lot to me. And if you guys want to support my independent commentary work, become a patron. Link in the description below. It's very easy and very, very, very helpful for me. And see you next time.